Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. Today, I've got Laura Eder coming to us from Minneapolis, Minnesota. She's the Senior Associate and Sustainable Design Director at ESG Architecture and Design. We've actually known each other through a colleague and worked on some projects together. So, Laura, thanks for jumping on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I can't wait to talk more about what you're doing at ESG and some of these really cool green building projects you're working on. But we've got to go back. I always like to ask my podcast guests, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
Yeah, so I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, small town outside of St. Louis called Ferguson, Missouri. It hit the map a few years ago. But I grew up there, and all of my family still lives in Missouri. I went to the school at the University of Kansas, so I'm a Jayhawk. I got my master's and 5-year program there. And then I got a job coming out of the downturn of the economy, and I moved down to Dallas, Texas.
Wow. I moved around and then got back up to Minnesota. So we'll have to have you connect those dots in a minute. But, did you always know you wanted to get into architecture first? And then I want to follow up with, what about sustainability? So how'd you know you wanted to kind of get into design? Did anybody kind of nudge you that way?
So my father actually went to school for architecture. He graduated also in a downturn of the economy and ended up going into computers, which for him was a really good choice. And I just grew up knowing and loving what architects could do, and the love that my father had for it. It was a passion that I had, and I just kind of continued that through my career path. And sustainability, I can't think of an exact moment when I started to be more sustainable minded, but I do remember being in college and being a junior and wanting to take the LEED exam. I don't know why I wanted to be a LEED AP so early in my career, but I just felt like I needed to. So I actually convinced the engineering school at Kansas, which I had nothing to do with because I was in the architecture school, to pay for my exam because I didn't want to pay the couple $100 while I was a student if I promised to help other students study and take the exam as well. So I did that, and that was a good memory that I have of early in my career kind of being focused on that sustainable design.
You're resourceful. That's a good deal. Well, when it comes to sustainability, though, who have you kind of maybe looked up to? Are there any other mentors? It's fantastic. You consider your father a mentor and maybe his architecture schooling background. Who else maybe had some influence on you, whether it's someone that you just read their material or followed, or maybe it's someone that was a little more close to you? Any other mentors?
Yeah, I am. When I moved down to Dallas, I started getting involved in the USGBC and the AIA Committee on the Environment. And I had so many people that I crossed paths with within those with those organizations. Sure. Norma Lehman is the Director of Sustainability at the Beck Group, which is a construction company as well as architecture and design. And she just has had a major impact on my career, and just being kind of a woman leader in a construction company that's not only doing great work, but also pushing sustainable design. And so I have always looked up to her and used her as a resource and a mentor throughout my career. And then my first job in Dallas, I worked at a company called GFF, Good Fulton and Farrell Architects. And my boss, Lawrence Cosby, was one of my biggest mentors. He was my direct supervisor, and he pushed me in many ways. He taught me how to be a good leader, but he didn't really push me in the realm of sustainability, but he always pushed me to kind of follow my dreams. And so I think that was definitely something that helped me kind of grow in the sustainability aspect by allowing me to have a passion for it.
No, that's great to have someone like that. That's really you can give a shout out to now at just the firm you worked at, but even one just within your network down there. And Beck Group doing a great job. We do some education with Beck, what a good company. And tell us what kind of work you did at GFF versus fast forward to today with ESG. Are there similar projects, different projects? But how'd you go from Texas to greater Minneapolis area?
Well, I met my husband in college, and I moved a Minnesotan to Texas.
Oh, okay.
And that was my first mistake. No, we lived in Texas for almost 10 years, and we have a wonderful 3-year-old daughter now, and we just felt like it was time to be closer to the family. And so about 1.5 years ago, we moved to Minnesota. So I actually worked at Good Fulton and Farrell for the full 9.5 to 10 years we were in Texas. And I left that position as an associate and the director of sustainability. I moved to Minnesota kind of not planning to follow the director of sustainability title, but it found me, I guess. When I started at ESG, I kind of said, I've been doing this in my background, but I'm not necessarily convinced that's where I need to be moving into a role at ESG. And after 6 months, it was inevitable that my passion and that position was just going to align perfectly. So
I love it. Well, let's go there for a minute. So for those listening that maybe are younger designers and architects, help us understand that role balance between the design work and maybe being that sustainable lead, that sustainable design director. Can you let us know a little bit about the back and forth and what kind of makes up some of your responsibilities?
Yeah, great idea. So right now in my position at ESG, I am trying to make a culture of sustainable building and less of a top-down kind of role. So we actually have over 30 employees that are on 6 different task forces that focus on various efforts that are their individual passions to make our company work as a whole more sustainable. So we have a materials group. We have a group that's just focused on sustainable messaging. So how do we talk about sustainability within the office and on social media? Then we also have a group that's focused on resource conservation that cares about saving water or energy. So if you like sustainability, but you really don't care about the energy model for some reason, but you really do care about how the impact on a material is impacting your health, you can actually just get involved in a group within the firm on that. So there's actually 6 different leaders of that, and I'm helping manage those 6 leaders and kind of creating goals and efforts within the firm on getting information to more people and having more people have ownership. So that's part of my role. And then the other part of my role is as new projects come in or as projects come through and clients have an interest in going after a sustainable certification or just how they can make their buildings more high performing. I am more or less an expert that might come into a meeting and talk about what they could do or talk to the team internally about what we can do or give recommendations for firms that we can hire if somebody wants to go after a certification such as your company to do a lead certification for a project.
Yeah, it's so great. I love how you start with culture and just that mindset. And, I guess it's leadership, right? So that's really cool. And you really didn't say lead too much. I know you're working on a lot of lead projects, probably some other rating systems, but it sounds like across the board, you're really trying to say, hey, where's the sustainability in all of our projects we're doing?
I love a certification, but it's not something that I feel like makes a project sustainable. So for me, if you want to make your project sustainable, I'll give you all the ways that we could do that and find ways that aligns with the goals that you have for a project as a client. But I'm not going to be the person that stands up in a meeting and says, well, if you don't get it certified, it's not actually real. So, but I also love USGBC's lead process, especially the lead for homes process with the changes in the high rise. And then for many years, I was actually a Green Globes professional as well. And I've done a couple of Green Globes projects. So
well-versed. I love it. Well, look back on the, highlight reel, if you would. And, what are some of your proudest achievements?
Oh, some of my proudest achievements. So in college, I was part of the Studio 804 Design Build program at the University of Kansas as part of my graduate degree. And we did what was called the Prescott Passive House. So we designed, there were, I think, about 20 students that designed and actually physically built a house. And it was a LEED Platinum as well as a Passive House certified house. And it was a learning experience, not only from the design and documentation of getting those certifications, but also from having to build what it required to get those certifications. So air sealing details for passive house, and then having to buy special windows because of the air leakage testing and doing the research that was required around that, and having to do our own indoor air quality tests for LEED. It was a great learning experience, and one of those projects that changed the trajectory for your career.
That's fantastic. And that was, early on there. And what else? Tell us a little more about the work you did in Texas, different region, maybe different clientele versus what you're doing in the Twin Cities and ESG. So was it different kind of projects?
I actually kept that in alignment. So I did mostly high-rise apartments in Dallas. I did a little bit of office work as well. That's where I got my Green Globe certifications in. But when I moved to Minneapolis, I figured there was going to be a lot of change in my career, and ESG's work aligned with some of the past work that I had done, including similar clients that I'd actually already worked with. So now I'm working on high-rise apartments again, and it's been a great shift from changing climates and jurisdictions and new zoning and building codes, because Minnesota just this month adopted the 2018 codes, but have been working on the 2012. So I had a great learning experience, but was able to keep that building type similar in my market change. So that's been fun.
Love it. Well, fast forward to today. I mean, we've talked a lot about your role at ESG, but just, what else is keeping you busy? Do you do any volunteer work? How else are you supporting the industry? But also talk a little more about your team and if you can, a couple projects you're working on today.
Yeah, so I've been super fortunate to work on some fun projects since I've started at ESG. One of the great parts about being the director of sustainable design is I get to touch a little bit of a lot of projects. I am also a full-time project architect as well on projects, and I'm working on a large multifamily project that sadly went on hold last month, so I can't really talk about it too much. But yeah, I'm working on a project in Minneapolis right now that's a 3-building apartment complex, or I guess 3-building apartment complex around an existing high-rise apartment tower. So I think the fun part of that is it's creating a lot of urban density and community for this area that doesn't really have a whole lot around it right now, but we're not tearing down that existing building. The client is interested in keeping that existing building and kind of adding the value around it, which has just been really fun to work with new and old on that, as well as keeping the fabric of that area kind of what it already is and keep it what it wants to be. So, and just adding value to that. So that's been really fun.
I have a follow-up question there, Laura. With the residential and even high-rise residential, I haven't been able to work on too many of these, but what about like affordable housing? And maybe, I'm not sure if it's there on some stuff you work on, or maybe what you've seen across the country. Can you speak to that for a minute? Do you have any experience there, or any thoughts on, what's it take to maybe have a good balance with affordable housing that can also be, high performance and green building?
Yeah, affordable housing is a big part of these larger mixed-use projects. Usually the deal happens early on before we even get involved, the architecture side, at least what percentage of units would be affordable housing and with the city. But Minneapolis is a great city on kind of pushing owners to do that in their new project builds. And they also give them area bonuses when they do that as well. So the buildings can actually get bigger if they do the affordable housing requirements from the city. So it is an integral part to pretty much almost all of the main urban density projects that we do for housing. I think Dallas was working towards a plan for that, but they hadn't had anything set when I was doing work there for affordable housing, and it being incentivized enough that owners were biting at it. But yeah, I think it plays a huge role in sustainability as well for creating those urban dense networks that people can afford to live in, is not just the expensive high rises that show up and push everybody else out of town.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I know that's a requirement on a lot of that. You're right. Just getting your early permitting, zoning, and just to have a certain mix of it. There'd be affordable housing. So, no, thanks for going for that. But yeah, anything else today you're working on, or does your team do any research or something you're kind of looking into? And then my next question will be about what's big, what's coming down the road. But anything else your team's working on now you want to talk about?
I don't know. One of the things that I guess I'm working on internally is kind of with the shift and change of the AIA guidelines that we should be talking about climate change with all of our projects. I'm trying to create it so that in all of our proposals that go out for all of our new work, that we are adding that level of commitment on our end to at least talk with owners about, even if it's not something that comes in as part of the project requirements. So that's been a really fun task, is to look at our proposals for office work, hotel work, multifamily work, and try to figure out how we can best include that from a front end perspective so that it doesn't get either forgotten or not talked about because the client isn't bringing it to the table.
Well, Laura, let's talk about what is coming next. What is in the crystal ball if we were to peek into it? Where do you think sustainability and the green building movement, where are they shifting? What should we be reading up on now?
Interesting. Well, I always find it interesting to be a part of the middle of the country because I know there's a lot of trends that happen here in the middle that have already trended on the East Coast and the West Coast. But I really think this shift towards occupant health and the user experience and the consumer caring about the supply chain of where products are coming from is really going to be where the focus lies, especially when it comes to companies that care about social justice, resiliency, integrity, all those things that kind of the Generation Z, the younger generation, wants to see, kind of that all-inclusive, we care about the earth mentality. I think that's what's coming if it's not already here.
Yeah, and I think, as we maybe use LEED as a reference, right? Pushing on building product manufacturers, EPDs, HPDs, cradle to cradle, just making sure we really are the clear label. I mean, a lot of good is happening there. I think there was pushback, right, when LEED was trying to go through updates over the last 5 or 6 years. But so maybe that's just a start. So any advice for those that are specifiers and architects on a non-LEED project where we're not chasing a point or two to really help us go better? Does it come down to the specs? Does it come down to the developer saying, hey, this is really important to us. We're going to really make sure everybody, not just the building product manufacturers and contractor, figure out what's in the spec, but, is an architect going to work with a contractor more closely to source things? I don't know. Where do you think this will evolve?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. One of the things I've been trying to get our team to do, especially from an interior side, is to, from a design perspective, sometimes we give multiple palette options where it's, do you like the green or the blue or the black kind of palette for this lobby area? And I'm trying to push for, do you like the most sustainable, the mid-level sustainable, or I don't care, and get a cost difference between them to show that being more sustainable in your product selection for those healthy material products isn't actually costing you a ton of money. So more on the education side of the clients of, let us help you understand where the cost lies in those, as well as just it can look good and still be good for the environment. I think that's been something we've been working through, but I personally think it lies in the specifications. I think there's a lot that is buried in the specifications that if we can specify good products, that the market, the contractors, the subcontractors will follow along.
No, that's fantastic. And I know sometimes you have spec writers in-house. Sometimes they use some different softwares to make sure they're using some of the latest information. And a lot of it's just, what do you want to put into this project? What's working? So maybe more collaboration there internally. Okay, good. Well, let's take a look at a little more about you, Warren, your career. This is a humbling question, but what do you think is your specialty or gift?
My gift. I would probably say that it's that I'm highly organized. I'm type A personality to a fault. And I think that organization has led me to have kind of a good memory for retaining information that the client or contractor or a presentation that I went to where I learn something and be able to use that information later on. I am also really positive. I'm kind of a glass half full, don't get discouraged with minor setbacks kind of a person. So I think that's also a good gift to have, especially when you're focusing on sustainability in a project, is what are the small successes that you can, hang your hat on or jump for joy with, where it's not, we didn't get to net zero, but we are doing our part to make the project better and make the environment not so angry at us.
All that positivity, Laura, and I'll be careful when I say this word, but, positivity is contagious, but in a good way, right? And I know we're going through a lot right now. A lot of people will be listening to this podcast while we're still in the middle of our pandemic crisis, and some will be listening to it next year, but just want to make sure everyone knows that, when you can, how does someone else want you to show up? You've got to think about that. And if you can be positive, you don't have to sugarcoat everything, but if you can just be positive, I think it really does rub off. So I think that is a gift. I think that's awesome. Well, as we get to know each other more, Laura, you'll learn I'm a fan of the bucket list. And I was just curious, what are one or two things on your bucket list?
I am not a huge fan of the bucket list.
Okay.
I am not, but I would have to say, if I had to add something to it, it's to travel, which makes it really hard to say during this time of the pandemic because I can't travel. But I married another architect, and we just have this desire to get out and go see cities and buildings and travel together. And we've been together for more than a decade, and we've traveled quite a bit. And I can't wait to travel more once everybody gets a clear green light to be able to do that.
Enough. And tell us though, what are one or two destinations maybe you and your husband are hoping to get to?
I really want to go to Banff in Canada and just see nature. I get very inspired by those kind of almost breathtaking natural backdrops, as well as, good architecture. And then we were actually going to LA for the AIA convention in May that got postponed, but I've actually never been to LA. So that's been something that I've had on my want to list for a while. So I guess we will be putting that back on our list of places we have to go if the convention doesn't get rescheduled. So well, maybe green build in November in San Diego and take a train up to LA. Well, let's talk about books. I'm not sure if you like to pick up a hard copy or listen to books. I like Audible, for example, but I'm just curious, is there a book or two you'd recommend? I love books. I am a book junkie, and I'm a self-help book junkie. Nice. I have a 3-year-old, so I don't pick up books anymore, but I do listen to audiobooks on Audible. I love Audible as well. Some of the ones that I've been reading lately that are kind of about your company and how to make your company better are right now, I'm listening to The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And then there's a great small book. It's a really short book called A Company of Owners by Darren Martin. Okay. It's graphically really cool, but it's also just kind of small tidbits about why your company should be a company of owners instead of a company of employees with 1 or 2 owners. Okay. And then there's one that is pretty inspiring. It's called The Energy Bus by John Gordon. And it's along the lines of a company of owners. It's how do you get all the right people on the bus to do what you want to do at your company? And those have been some inspiring books. The hard thing about hard things is because we're all going through some hard things right now. And I just thought that it would be the right time to read that one. Those are all great. I've only read the first one. So the other two I've got to check out. And you know what? We're going to put the links to these books that Laura's mentioned down in the podcast show notes. Let's, as we start to wrap up here, a 2-part question. You've made this career in design, this career in sustainability and green buildings. Is there anything you wish you'd done a little earlier in your career? I think I wish I had known earlier in my career that taking risks is not as scary as you might think it is. So whether that's taking a new job or asking for something in a meeting with your boss that you want, or just speaking up on a project team of saying, this is what I want to do, just those small kind of asks or big asks that taking risks are what it's all about, and you shouldn't have to be scared to do them. And I I'm hoping that I'm learning that every day, that I can still continue to do that.
That's good. Great attitude about it all. Well, then my last question, some listening right now, are just now jumping into the green building movement, and others maybe have been doing this a long time and they love listening to the podcast to validate some things they've been thinking or get to know an industry peer a little better. But any words of encouragement for someone listening that's jumping into the green building movement right now?
Somebody that's jumping into the green building movement right now is, I would say, find something that interests you within the green building movement and focus on that, because the green building movement has so many parts and pieces. Sustainability, resiliency, it's so broad. It's hard to kind of find a topic within that. And I think if you can pick what is your passion within that sustainability umbrella, then you can really narrow in on something that makes you happy and also can kind of do a big difference. Like if LEED and green building and USGBC is your passion, or if healthy materials is your passion, there's all kinds of different ways to get involved and to get more knowledge about that.
Love it. And maybe a quick follow-up before we wrap up. And I love teaching like a LEED green associate class, or sometimes a LEED with specialty or well AP. We do a lot of training, but it's a nice coverall. So where do you think you should get a little more detailed and become a subject matter expert on a certain part versus where to kind of keep it higher level and maybe not go as deep? Any advice on if you find a passion, do you become that expert on it, or do you still try to stay pretty well-rounded? Like at what point do you kind of niche down, I guess is my question.
That's a good question. I think it depends on what your end goal is. If your end goal is to be a director of sustainability at an architecture firm, then I think you need to be a little bit more broad in what you're learning. If your desire is to be a spec writer, you're probably also going to want to be more broad. If your desire is to be a project architect, you might only pay attention to the things that have to do with the building envelope. If you're an interior designer, you might only pay attention to the things that are about healthy materials. I think it just kind of depends on where your passion lies and what you want to do with your career. And there's always time to learn more. So you can focus on something, learn a lot about it, and then in 2 or 3 years or however long it takes you to learn a lot about it, pick a new portion and start learning more about that.
No, great advice. And I've really enjoyed our conversation. So, from Missouri to Texas to Minnesota, Laura, thanks for being on the podcast. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.